The streets of Babylon smelled of blood. The waters of the Euphrates were witnesses to the darkest oppression in history. The shadows of the temples covered the city, and a people who worshipped the stars bowed to stones they carved with their own hands. This city, founded by the grandchildren of Nuh alayhissalam, had now destroyed even the last traces of Tawhid. At first, Nimrod was different. He gave justice and showed fairness. But as his kingdom grew, his heart turned to stone. Pride came quietly and spread its roots in silence. One day, he went too far and announced, "I am your God, worship to me." He placed his statues in every square. He ordered idols made of gold, silver, and bronze. But the greatest idol was himself. People were to worship him. The punishment for those who did not was clear: death. The temples were no longer only places of worship. They became centers of production. Hundreds of workers carved idols day and night. Idols representing the moon, statues for the sun, and shapes of the stars. The state even had an official duty: minister of temples. Darkness had grown so deep that deviation became a state policy. As you watch this video about the hidden secrets between Nimrod and Ibrahim alayhissalam, you will hear Shaitan's role in this story for the first time. Before we begin, a small reminder: to not miss videos like this, subscribe to the channel and do not forget to like the video so it can reach more people.
Someone help him, quickly!
If you are ready, let's begin. That night, Nimrod saw a terrible dream. The sky was torn apart. A new light appeared. That light was so strong that it put out the light of the sun, the moon, and all the stars. Nimrod trembled on his throne. Then a shadow appeared. A man came closer, stretched out his hand, and threw Nimrod from his throne to the ground. His awakening was terrible. He was covered in sweat. His hands were shaking. He immediately called the astrologers. Star readers, soothsayers, magicians, all gathered in the darkest room of the palace. He told them the dream. Silence fell. Then the oldest astrologer spoke. "O our ruler, a new religion will come. The one who brings it will destroy your throne. Take your measures now." Nimrod's face turned to stone. What should be done? All male children to be born must be killed. The decision was made that night. By morning, the decree was read street by street. Every male baby born in Babylon will be killed. Murderers went from door to door. Mothers' screams rose to the sky. Babies were torn from their arms. Swords fell. Blood flowed. 100,000 babies lost their lives. The waters of the Euphrates turned red. One of the greatest massacres in history took place. Babylon was now a great graveyard. It was in those days that the mother of Ibrahim alayhissalam was pregnant. Her name was Amathli. Amathli could hardly breathe from fear. The baby in her womb grew every day, and the danger came closer each day. She could not tell her husband, Azar. Azar was a temple worker. He was loyal to Nimrod. He would do anything to increase his status. The day of birth came closer. The pains began. Amathli turned to Azar and lied. "Go to the temple and pray to the idols. If I give birth to a boy, I will bring him to you. You will take him to Nimrod. This way, your status will increase." Azar left. Amathli did not miss the chance. The pains became stronger, but she could not give birth at home. Neighbors would hear. Executioners would come. With an old blanket in her hands, she went out of the city in the darkness. Her feet were bare. Every step increased the pain. She could not breathe, but she could not stop. When she reached the cave, the moon was in the sky. On the cold stones, completely alone, Ibrahim alayhissalam was born. The baby did not cry. He only opened his eyes. There was a light in those eyes. He looked at his mother. Trembling, Amathli took the child in her arms and breastfed him. Then she wrapped him in the old blanket and placed him in the darkest corner of the cave. She quickly returned home. Everything had to look normal before Azar came back. When Azar arrived, Amathli was crying. "The child was born very weak," she said. "He died immediately. I buried the body somewhere outside." Azar believed her. He even felt relieved. "That is good," he said. "At least I did not get into trouble." From that night on, her life was divided into two. By day, she was a normal woman. By night, with the courage of a desperate mother, she left the city in the darkness and went to the cave. Every night, whenever she could, she was there. She breastfed the baby, kissed him, and cried. When she left, the cave was silent and the baby was alone, but he was not without care. One day, she noticed the truth. The baby was sucking his fingers. At first, she thought it was normal. Then she looked closer and froze. Something was flowing from between his fingers. Honey, milk, date juice. Jibril alayhissalam, by the command of Allah, was feeding that baby every night. When the mother did not come, Ibrahim was not alone. Angels were standing guard over him. The child grew. He grew fast. At 1 year old, he was like a 5-year-old. At 5, like a 10-year-old. His mind was sharp. His eyes were deep. His words were mature. Amathli looked at her child's face. These eyes looked different. There were signs of deep iman. While executioners were hunting babies outside, Ibrahim was growing deep in the cave with the lullaby of angels. Days followed weeks. Weeks followed months. Ibrahim was growing much faster than others his age. The cave became both his cradle and his school. Those eyes shining in the darkness would soon tear apart the deep darkness covering all of Babylon. The rule of idols had already begun to shake. While Nimrod raised his cup in his palace, drunk with victory, he did not know that his real end was growing in a cave with divine power. The wheels of destiny had begun to turn, and the dawn of Tawhid was about to rise. Years passed. The child who grew in that lonely cave with the breath of Jibril and the grace of Allah was now ready to step onto the earth. When he went down to the city, what he saw crushed his soul. The streets were crowded, people were in a rush, but all of them seemed tied to each other with invisible chains. The squares were full of statues carved from stone and wood. Some people bowed in front of them. Some poured oil on lifeless stones. Some begged for mercy from dolls they made with their own hands. Ibrahim was shocked by what he saw. What kind of blindness was this? How could a human worship what he himself created? Here, a truth of fitrah, a law of Allah, becomes clear at once. If a child grows up without being shaped by society, he stays on fitrah and naturally believes in one Allah. He finds belief in human-made pagan gods strange. Ibrahim protected this pure fitrah he was born with. As he walked among the people, his steps unknowingly brought him in front of a workshop. The place smelled of dust, wood shavings, and heavy paint. Inside, an old man was shaping a hard log with a chisel. His face was tired, his hands were rough with calluses. This man was Azar, Ibrahim's father, Nimrod's chief sculptor. Ibrahim entered. Azar raised his head. He looked at the young man standing before him with a face full of light. They say blood recognizes blood. A movement stirred in Azar's heart. Later, when his wife told him the truth, he would understand that this was his son. The years of hiding, the secret of the cave would be revealed. When Azar learned that he had a son, he was happy. But this joy was mostly worldly. He was not happy because his son was alive, but because a new strength had come. Someone to work as his apprentice and help sell his idols. Azar was hard, like the stones he carved. One day he said to his son, "Come, help me. We must finish these gods by tomorrow." "Gods?" Ibrahim stepped closer to the workbench. Azar was carving the eyes of an idol, blind eyes. Then he carved its ears, deaf ears. With every strike of the hammer in his father's hand, Ibrahim saw how weak that idol was. "Father," Ibrahim said. His voice was clear, like water flowing in the noisy workshop. "This thing you are carving, can it hear you?" Azar stopped. The hammer froze in the air. "Of course it hears," he replied angrily. "It is our God." "But you made its ears," Ibrahim said. "You carved its eyes. If it falls, it cannot stand up. How can it help you?" Azar growled in anger. "Be quiet. Do not speak against the gods of Babylon. Take these statues to the market. Shout, 'Who will buy what cannot harm or benefit?'" Ibrahim carried the idols, but when he reached the market, he did not do what his father said. He dragged the idols by their feet. He covered them in dust and dirt. In front of the shocked eyes of the people, he pushed the lifeless logs into the river. "Drink," he said to the piece of wood. "You are thirsty, come on, drink." The people were stunned. Had this young man lost his mind? He was mocking the objects they considered sacred. But Ibrahim was not mad. He was the only sane one in a society that had lost its mind. That day, no one bought an idol, but a seed of doubt fell into everyone's mind like a poisonous vine. What if they really cannot drink? Night fell. Babylon fell asleep, but Ibrahim was awake. When the noise of the city stopped, the great silence of the sky began. Ibrahim moved away from the city and climbed a hill. He wanted to escape the air of idol worship that burned his chest and breathed the truth. He was alone, but he was with his Rab. He raised his head. The sky covered him like black velvet, and in that endless darkness, a bright star appeared, the Venus star. It was so bright that the people of Babylon worshipped it. They offered sacrifices to it. Ibrahim looked at the shining light of the star. He tested the belief of his people in his mind. "Is this my Rab?" he said to himself. Surah Al-An'am 76. The star ruled the sky for a while. Its light pierced the darkness. But as the night moved on and the world turned, that bright light became weak. It slid toward the horizon and finally disappeared into the darkness. It set. A painful smile appeared on Ibrahim's face. How could a god disappear? How could a creator hide behind the horizon he created? How could something tied to place, time, and movement be a god? He spoke to the night. "I do not love those that set." Surah Al-An'am 76. Short, clear, sharp. What sets, leaves, dies, or disappears cannot be a god. The heart cannot attach itself to what is temporary. Then he waited. On the horizon, the moon rose like a silver plate. It was full, bigger than the star, closer, more impressive. It had a cold and noble light that turned night into day. Ibrahim looked at it. "Is this my Rab?" he said. The moon moved across the sky. It passed through the clouds, but when dawn came close, its rule also ended. Its light faded, its color weakened, and it disappeared before the light that announced the sun. It too was defeated. Ibrahim's faith became firm. Even the lights of the sky obeyed a law. They were not rulers, they were ruled. "If my Rab does not guide me, I will surely be among the misguided people," he said. Surah Al-An'am 77. And then the eastern horizon turned red. Darkness pulled back like a blanket. The sun rose in all its glory. It swallowed the star and erased the moon. It looked like the only ruler of the sky. It was the greatest god of the people of Babylon. Ibrahim narrowed his eyes. "Is this my Rab? This is greater than all of them," he said. Surah Al-An'am 78. The sun rose higher, reached its peak, and burned the earth. But when evening came, that huge ball of fire also bowed its head. It sank beneath the earth in the western horizon, leaving a blood-red trace behind. Darkness took over the world again. Even the greatest had set. Even the strongest had been defeated. Ibrahim stood up. There was an unseen power that turned the star, the moon and the sun, that made them rise and set, that drew their paths. The stones of Babylon and the bodies in the sky, all of them were weak. He turned to his people. On his face was the dignity of prophethood. In his eyes were the flashes of Tawhid. He cried out to the people and to his father, "O my people, I am free from what you associate with Allah. I have turned my face completely toward the one who created the heavens and the earth from nothing, and I am not of those who associate partners." Surah Al-An'am 79. These words echoed on the walls of Babylon, but their strongest echo would be inside the house of his father, Azar. Ibrahim returned home. The workshop was still filled with the same heavy smell. Azar stood in front of a finished idol, looking at his work with admiration. Ibrahim sat beside his father. This time his voice was not questioning, but inviting. Still, his words were sharp. "My father," he said gently, "why do you worship things that do not hear, do not see, and bring you no benefit?" Surah Maryam 42. Azar flinched. He was wiping dust from the idol with a cloth. "You again, Ibrahim," he growled. "This is the religion of our fathers, our tradition." Ibrahim continued and looked straight into his father's eyes. He wanted to lift the veil from them. "My father, knowledge has come to me that did not come to you. Follow me, and I will guide you to a straight path." Surah Maryam 43. Azar's face tightened. A son could not guide his father. In the tradition of Babylon, this was rebellion. "Are you trying to teach me?" he shouted. Ibrahim did not step back. He could see the trap of Shaitan. "My father, do not worship Shaitan. Shaitan has rebelled against Ar-Rahman. My father, I truly fear that a punishment from Ar-Rahman may touch you, and then you would become a friend of Shaitan." Surah Maryam 44 to 45. These words were the last drop. The pride of idol worship crushed fatherly mercy. Azar jumped to his feet. He grabbed the chisel he used for carving. His face turned red with anger. "O Ibrahim," he said, "do you turn away from my gods? If you do not stop this, I swear I will stone you. Leave me for a long time. Go away." Surah Maryam 46. A deadly silence filled the room. Ibrahim saw the hatred on his father's face. Stoning. He was being threatened with death by his own father. But he was the friend of Allah, the Khalilullah. There was no fear in his heart, only sadness, the sadness of watching a soul being dragged into fire. He stood up. He looked at his father one last time, with mercy. Calmly, he said these words, "I will ask my Rabb to forgive you. Truly, he has always been kind to me." Surah Maryam 47. Then he turned his back. He left that house full of idols and walked away from the living dead. Ibrahim was now alone. His father had driven him away. His people did not understand him, but he had found the owner of the heavens and the earth. Now it was time to break the rule of those false gods. Words were over. The time for action had come. The great festival approaching in the square of Babylon would be the end of the idols and the beginning of the fire. Axes would be sharpened, stones would be broken, and chaos would erupt. There was a day in the calendar of Babylon. On that day, the mind of the city was suspended. On that day, it was a festival for the idols. The Chaldean tribe gathered every year on that day. In a wide area set up outside the city, a fair would begin. Incense was burned, sacrifices were offered, drinks flowed, and laughter rose. People celebrated in honor of the stones they had made with their own hands. They shouted for the idols, but the idols were silent as always. On that day, the temples were empty. This was the day Ibrahim alayhissalam was waiting for. His father Azar called out to him, "Today is the festival. Come with us." Ibrahim alayhissalam stopped. There was no anger on his face, no fear, only a heavy decision. "I am sick," he said. This was not a sickness of the body. It was a word spoken against the sickness of a society. The Quran describes this moment briefly but sharply. He said to them, "Indeed, I am sick." Surah As-Safat 89. The people flowed out of the city. Drums were beaten, songs were sung for the idols, and the heart of Babylon became silent for the first time. Ibrahim alayhissalam came to the door of the temple. He entered. Idols made of copper, silver, stone, and wood were lined up. Food had been placed in front of them, so that they would give blessing, or rather, because people believed they gave blessing. Ibrahim alayhissalam stopped. He looked at the idols. Then he spoke. His voice echoed, but there was no answer. The Quran presents this scene clearly. He entered upon their gods and said, "Will you not eat? What is wrong with you that you do not speak?" Surah As-Safat 91. These words were not mockery. They were a diagnosis of a mind that bows to something that does not speak, does not hear, and does not answer. The idols were silent, as they always were. Ibrahim alayhissalam reached out. He took an axe. That axe was not raised only against stone. It was raised against a mindset of centuries. He began to strike. One idol fell, then another, then another. Stone shattered, silver split, wood broke. Each strike hit the lie of Babylon. Each broken piece shouted that this god was false, but without a voice. The Quran records this moment as follows. So he broke them into pieces, except for the largest of them, so that they might return to it. Surah Al-Anbiya 58. The largest idol remained. It was made of gold. It stood on a throne-like place. There was a crown on its head. Ibrahim alayhissalam took the axe, and he hung it on the neck of the largest idol. Then he stopped. He stepped back. He left the temple. When the sun was setting, the people returned. There was drunkenness. There was exhaustion. But something was missing. Trust. The door was opened. They entered, and a scream broke out. The idols were on the ground, broken into pieces, silent, as always. But this time, the silence was different. This time, it was the silence of being caught. The people looked at each other. Who did this? Who dared? A voice rose. This was done by a young man who spoke against our gods. They call him Ibrahim. Ibrahim alayhissalam was brought into the middle of the crowd. Faces were angry, but there was hesitation in the eyes, because deep inside, everyone knew. "Did you do this to our gods?" they said. Ibrahim alayhissalam looked at the largest idol. He looked at the axe. Then he spoke. "Perhaps the largest of them did it. Ask them if they can speak." Surah Al-Anbiya 63. These words were like a mirror thrown into the crowd, and in that mirror, everyone saw himself. They paused for a moment. They fell silent for a moment. The Quran describes that moment like this. So they returned to themselves and said, "Indeed, you are the wrongdoers." Surah Al-Anbiya 64. But this return did not last long, because when truth threatens interest, people retreat. "You know that these do not speak," they said. Then Ibrahim alayhissalam delivered the final blow. It was not gentle, but it was just. "Then, do you worship instead of Allah things that cannot benefit you or harm you? Shame on you and on what you worship besides Allah." Surah Al-Anbiya 67. These words left no room to turn back. They were rebellion, but not chaos, a rebellion of Tawhid. The crowd went mad. Instead of accepting the truth, they wanted to silence it. "If you are going to do something, burn him," they said. "Help your gods." This sentence was the last sentence of Babylon, because if a god needs help, it is not a god. Ibrahim alayhissalam breaking the idols was not vandalism, it was worship, a worship that destroyed prostrations directed to the wrong place. This event would now reach the palace. Now Nimrod would hear. Now the matter was no longer between a young man and the people. Now the matter was between a servant and a false god. And this confrontation would be bloody. The news of the broken idols entered through the heavy gates of Nimrod's palace. Everyone who passed through those gates bowed first, because inside there was not a king, but a man who believed himself to be a god. Everyone who came before Nimrod knelt down. This was not a tradition, it was a ritual of submission. Ibrahim alayhissalam was brought to Nimrod's palace after a complaint. When he faced Nimrod, he did not bow like the others. He did not make sujood. Silence fell over the palace. That silence was sharper than a sword, because the usual order was broken. Nimrod frowned. "Why do you not make sujood?" he said. There was no surprise in his voice. There was humiliation. Ibrahim alayhissalam did not lower his eyes, but he did not look with pride either. He spoke in a calm voice. "I make sujood to the one who created both you and me," he said. "I do not bow to anyone else." This sentence struck the walls of the palace. After the idols, now the throne itself was shaking. Nimrod stood up. He had perhaps never heard such a challenge in his life. "Who is your Rab?" he asked. The question looked simple, but its answer destroys kingdoms. Ibrahim alayhissalam did not hesitate. "My Rab is the one who gives life and causes death." The Quran describes this scene clearly. "Have you not seen the one who argued with Ibrahim about his Rab? Because Allah had given him kingship, Ibrahim said, 'My Rab is the one who gives life and causes death.'" Bukhari 258. Nimrod laughed. It was the laughter of ignorance. "I also give life and cause death," he said. He ordered 2 prisoners to be brought. He killed one. He released the other. "Look," he said, "I did it too." This is where the mind collapses, because killing is not taking the soul, and releasing someone is not giving life. Nimrod did not know this. He did not want to know, because knowing would mean leaving the throne. Ibrahim alayhissalam did not extend the argument. He did not go into details. He chose one sentence, and that sentence silenced Nimrod. "Allah brings the sun from the east," he said. "If you have power, then bring it from the west." The Quran seals this moment with one sentence. Ibrahim said, "Allah brings the sun from the east, so bring it from the west." Then the disbeliever was left stunned. Bukhari 258. There was no sound left in the palace. The astrologers did not speak. The soldiers did not shout. Nimrod could not answer. Because the sun cannot be struck with arrows. Because the sky does not sit on a throne. Nimrod's face darkened. That darkness turned into anger. A king does not accept defeat, especially if he believes himself to be a god. Nimrod made a sign with his hand. Ibrahim alayhissalam was taken. He was brought to prison. The prison was dark, but darkness was not strange to Ibrahim alayhissalam. He had grown up in a cave. He knew darkness. The stones of the prison were cold, but his heart was warm. Outside, Nimrod was deciding. What kind of punishment? What kind of lesson? Because the matter was no longer just idols. The matter was that a servant had said, "No." The deepening of Nimrod's pride. Nimrod could not sleep after that night. He turned restlessly on his throne. The words of a young man tore his night apart. "Bring the sun from the west." This sentence echoed in his ears. No matter how many soldiers he called, no matter how many towers he ordered to be built, the sentence did not fall silent. Pride sometimes pushes a person further forward. Instead of turning back, he runs toward the cliff. Nimrod did the same. Saying, "I am God," was no longer enough. "I will prove it," he said. Ibrahim alayhissalam waited in the prison. He was not impatient. He did not make plans to escape, because he knew this. This cause moves not by planning, but by submission. The Quran praises this state of Ibrahim alayhissalam, and Ibrahim, who fulfilled his word. Najm 37. Nimrod wanted to make the punishment greater. Killing alone was not enough. There had to be a lesson, and that lesson would be fire. But before the fire, he needed proof to rebuild his authority that had been shaken by words. That proof would be the famous Tower of Nimrod. Nimrod was alone on the balcony of his palace, but his mind was full of noise. Ibrahim's words, "Bring the sun from the west," were echoing in his head. He believed he was the ruler of the earth. He could not accept being silenced by the son of a shepherd. He lifted his eyes to the sky. His enemy was not on the ground, but above. He clenched his fist and gave a terrible order. "I am the God of the earth. Now it is time to settle accounts with the God of the heavens." An unseen construction began on the plains of Babylon. Nimrod wanted a massive tower that would challenge the gates of the sky. Thousands of slaves carried stones and baked bricks under the sound of whips. As the tower rose, the pride of mankind rose with it. Years passed. The tower became so high that those who climbed to the top saw the city below like an ant nest. This structure, cutting through the clouds, stood like a stone dagger stabbed into the heart of Babylon. When the tower was completed, it is said in non-Islamic sources and legends that Nimrod moved to the second stage of his madness. It is claimed that he rose into the sky using specially trained birds. Since this story does not seem reliable to us, we will not go into its details here. Standing on the top of the tower, Nimrod shouted into the emptiness, "Where are you, the Rab of Ibrahim? I am here. I have come to take your kingdom." He pulled his bow tight. The string was stretched so hard it looked ready to snap. With all his strength, Nimrod shot the arrow into the heart of the sky, into infinity. The arrow pierced the clouds and disappeared from sight. There was a silent and tense waiting. Only the sound of the wind could be heard. After a while, the arrow fell back down at great speed and struck the ground in front of the throne. Nimrod froze. The tip and the shaft of the arrow were covered in fresh, bright red blood. This was a divine test. By the will of Allah, the arrow had been stained with the blood of a bird or a fish in the air, so that Nimrod would drown in his own pride. Nimrod burst into loud laughter. It was so strong that the chests shook. "I hit him," he shouted. "I killed the Rab of Ibrahim. The ruler of the sky is now me." When Nimrod came down, he was holding the bloody arrow in his hand. Tens of thousands of people gathered in the square, filled with fear. Nimrod raised the arrow into the air. "Look, here is the proof. I killed the God of Ibrahim." The people fell to the ground in fear and shock. Shouts of, "You are great, Nimrod," shook the land and the sky. Nimrod leaned back on his throne, drunk with victory. He believed there was no power left that could stop him. At that moment, deep underground, in a dark and damp prison, Ibrahim was in chains. He could hear the noise above, but his heart was full of peace. He knew that Nimrod's false victory was actually a sign of his coming destruction. With a slight smile on his lips, he whispered, "Hasbi Allah wa ni'mal wakil." While there was feast and celebration above, there was a quiet waiting below. But Nimrod's anger had not yet cooled. He believed he had killed Ibrahim's God, and now he wanted to burn Ibrahim himself in his own hell. The feeling of victory in Babylon did not last long. Nimrod believed he had killed the God of the heavens, but the representative of that God on earth, Ibrahim, was still alive and breathing in the prison. Ibrahim's existence cast a shadow over Nimrod's claim of divinity. Killing him quietly was not enough. He had to destroy him in such a way that no one would ever dare to oppose him again. Nimrod gathered his ministers in the war room, lit by dim torches. His eyes were red with rage. "What should we do to him?" he growled. "Cutting him with a sword would be a reward for him. Tell me a punishment so painful that it reaches his soul, so complete that not even dust remains of his body." A heavy silence filled the room. From a corner stepped forward the chief advisor, Hunun, with a sly light in his eyes. In some reports, he is described as Shaitan in human form. "O son of Babylon," Hunun hissed like a snake, "let us burn him in fire, but not an ordinary fire. Let us prepare a hell the world has never seen, a fire so great that people will feel its heat from miles away." A twisted smile appeared on Nimrod's face. "Yes," he whispered, "fire, the color of my power." The next day, the street callers, the media of that time, spread through the streets of Babylon. The order was clear. Whoever is loyal to Nimrod, whoever is an enemy of Ibrahim's God, bring wood. From that moment on, Babylon lost its mind. The people acted as if under a spell. For 1 full month, wood was carried non-stop to the wide plain outside the city. Sick women made vows, saying, "If I recover, I will carry wood to burn Ibrahim." Poor people broke the only wooden furniture in their homes and brought it. Rich people spent their wealth to buy wood. On the plain of Babylon, inside a huge stone-built area, logs were piled like mountains. This was not just a pile of wood. It was a mountain built by human hands. When the preparations were finished, Nimrod gave the signal. Thousands of torches were thrown at the base of the woodpile at the same time. First, a thick grey smoke covered Babylon. The sun disappeared. Then a deep roaring sound was heard, as if a monster beneath the earth was waking up. And then the flames exploded. The fire grew so large and rose so high that those watching from the walls of Babylon felt unbearable heat on their faces. The sound of the flames drowned out thunder. The cracking of the burning wood echoed like bones breaking. The heat of the fire reached such a level that birds flying in the sky had their wings burned when they hit the wave of heat and fell into the fire like blackened stones. No living creature could come even 100 meters close to the fire. Nimrod watched this scene from a high tower of his palace, the red glow of the flames reflecting on his face. "Now," he said to those beside him, "bring Ibrahim. Let us see how his Rab will save him from this fire." But there was a serious problem. The fire was so hot that the soldiers could not even get close enough to throw Ibrahim into it. The moment they approached, their clothes would catch fire. Nimrod went mad with anger. "Find a way to throw him in," he shouted. As they waited in helplessness, that same sly mind, Hunun, also known as Iblis, would step in again and present the idea of building the first catapult in human history. Leather ropes stretched between 2 massive pillars were prepared to throw Ibrahim like a projectile into the heart of the fire. Ibrahim alayhissalam was placed on the catapult. The fire was in front of him. The crowd held its breath. Nimrod was watching. He was waiting for victory. While this was happening below, movement began in the depths of the heavens. The angels were watching this unmatched oppression on earth with horror. Ibrahim, whom Allah had called my friend, was being sent to death alone. The gates of the heavens were opened, and the angels cried out to Allah, "O our Rabb, the only person on earth who worships you is being thrown into the fire. Allow us to help him." Only one answer came from Allah. "If my servant asks you for help, then help him." As Ibrahim was tied to the catapult, waiting to be thrown into the air, time seemed to freeze. First, the angel of wind appeared. "O Ibrahim, I am the angel who controls the winds. If you wish, I can scatter this fire with a single storm and spread its ashes over Babylon." Ibrahim replied calmly, "I do not ask help from you." Then the angel of water came. "O Ibrahim, I am the master of the waters. If you wish, I can split the skies and send floods that will put out this fire in a single second." Ibrahim again refused. "You are not my helper." Finally, Jibril appeared in his great majesty. The catapult was about to be released. The ropes were stretched tight. Jibril asked, "O Ibrahim, do you have any need? Do you have any command for me?" Ibrahim looked at the huge mass of fire that was about to turn even birds into ash. Then he turned his gaze to the sky. There was no fear in his eyes, no doubt. With pure submission, he gave that historic answer. I have no request from you, Jibreel. My Rabb knows my state, and that is enough for me. Allah is enough for me. He is the best trustee. The moment these words left his lips, the executioner struck the axe, and the rope of the catapult snapped. Ibrahim was thrown into the air as lightly as a bird. The people of Babylon held their breath. Nimrod rose from his throne. Ibrahim's white clothes shone for a moment in the red glow of the flames, and then he began to fall into that vast sea of fire. Earth and sky fell silent. Those few seconds while Ibrahim floated in the air were the longest wait in human history. Even as he fell toward the fire, his lips were moving. He was not thinking of the burning of the fire, but of the will of the friend, Allah. Ibrahim alayhissalam had fully surrendered. Mercy or punishment, both were beautiful to him. Paradise or hell were the same. The true owner of the body was Allah. If he wished, he would burn it. If he wished, he would cool it. This was the peak of Tawhid. While Ibrahim alayhis salam was falling toward the fire, his heart did not change at all. He did not shout. He did not close his eyes. He did not speak a final word. That word had already been spoken. Allah is enough for us. That sentence was before the catapult, but its effect would appear after the catapult. The fire was burning. But it did not know what to do, because fire is also a created being. It does not burn without command. It cannot cross its limits. The Quran reminds this in another context. To Allah belongs whatever is in the heavens and whatever is on the earth. Bukhari 284. The fire belonged to him. So did Ibrahim alayhis salam. People thought the fire would win. Nimrod expected victory. The ministers smiled, but the sky was silent. That silence was the calm before the storm, because now it was time for Allah's command. And that command was spoken to the fire. O fire, be coolness and safety for Ibrahim. Anbiya 69. Yes, fire does not burn just because it is fire. It is under Allah's control. If he wishes, he makes it cool. If he wishes, he makes it warm. If he wishes, he makes it burn. All created things take commands from Allah, and without his permission, none of them have any power. If people had understood this truth, they would not have been confused that day. But they were stunned. Nimrod saw it. He could not believe his eyes. For a moment he was silent. For a moment his tongue was tied. Then he spoke. How great your Rabb is, he said. He protected you. This sentence sounds like belief, but it is not belief, because belief is not only admiration, belief is submission. Nimrod did not submit. He admired, but he did not bow. He said, I will offer sacrifices for your Rabb. According to reports, he slaughtered thousands of animals. Ibrahim alayhis salam replied, unless you come to Tawhid, your sacrifices have no value. This did not stop Nimrod, but it did not stop Ibrahim either. Something happened within the crowd. Not everyone was blind. Some looked at the fire, some looked at Ibrahim, some thought for the first time, if this fire does not burn, if this man does not burn, what are these gods for? A group believed, quietly, without show. Because belief does not always come with crowds. Sometimes it comes out of the fire. There are reports about the place where this event happened. Balikli Gol in Urfa is associated with this miracle. It is said that when Ibrahim alayhis salam was thrown into the fire turned into water. The wood became ash. The ashes turned into fish. These reports do not claim historical certainty, but they carry a truth in the memory of the people. Fire was defeated by water. Oppression was defeated by mercy. Ibrahim alayhis salam came out of the fire. He walked away. He left the fire behind like dust shaken from clothes. He did not challenge anyone. He did not say, "Did you see?" He did not take revenge. because he had won his cause not with fire, but with submission. The Quran praises him like this: "Indeed, Ibrahim was gentle, deeply feeling, and one who turned to Allah." Hud 1175, gentle. What a strange description for a man who came out of fire, but this is the language of truth. After this miracle, nothing in Babylon was the same. The idols were still standing, perhaps, but cracks had formed in the hearts. Nimrod acted as if he was not defeated, but deep inside he knew, a king who could not even make fire burn. What kind of God is that? But pride takes a person all the way to the end, and Nimrod had not yet reached the end of his path. For Ibrahim alayhissalam, the time to stay was over. This city had become too narrow for him. A new path would open, a new beginning. Hijrah and a new beginning. The fire was out, but oppression was not. Ibrahim alayhissalam came out of the fire. Babylon was still there. The idols were still in the squares. Nimrod was still on the throne. The miracle did not end disbelief. It only made the line between truth and falsehood deeper. Some hearts believed, but power became even harsher. Because oppressors do not repent when they see a miracle, they prepare for greater oppression. At this point, the divine command came, silent, clear, with no return. This was not an escape. This was leaving. Hijrah was not because of fear. Hijrah was to protect the cause. For Ibrahim alayhissalam, Babylon was no longer a city. It was a curtain, a heavy curtain standing in front of the truth. Everyone turned their back, but one person stopped. Lut. The Quran says it clearly, and Lut believed in him. Ankabut 26. This sentence is short, but very heavy, because it shows that Ibrahim was not alone after the fire. It shows that the cause did not remain with one person. Lut alayhissalam was Ibrahim's nephew, but this bond came after the bond of faith. He saw that the idols were silent. He saw that the fire did not burn, and his heart decided, sometimes faith does not come after long preaching. Sometimes one moment of truth is enough. Ibrahim alayhissalam was not alone. Sarah was with him. Our mother Sarah, she was calm, she was patience, she was a quiet strength. The Quran does not speak long about her, but she is always there in Ibrahim's journeys, because some people are written not with words, but with their stance. Sarah was a companion who lightened Ibrahim's burden, in migration, in poverty, in danger. Faith was not carried on the shoulders of one prophet alone. There was a family carrying this cause. On the road of Hijrah, there was another test. The Quran mentions it briefly, but reports speak clearly. Ibrahim and Sarah entered another land. The king of this land was oppressive. He desired women. He was especially interested in married women. This news reached him. They heard about Sarah's beauty, and she was called to the palace. This was not a palace invitation. It was a threat. Ibrahim alayhissalam knew this situation, and he said to Sarah, "If they ask, say, 'You are my sister.'" This was not a lie, because he meant sister in faith. Sarah entered the palace. Her heart was not calm, but she was surrendered. The king wanted to approach her. At that moment, his hand was held back. Pain spread through his body. He was afraid. He stepped back. "Pray for me," he said. Sarah prayed. The king was released. He tried again. Again, he was stopped. He understood. This woman was protected, not by soldiers, but by prayer. The king stepped back. He did not touch Sarah. The king was so afraid of and impressed by Sarah that as an apology and a sign of respect, he gifted Hajar, one of the most noble servants of the palace. Ibrahim, Sarah, and Hajar together left Egypt. After this event, they turned their route toward the lands of Palestine and Haran. Ibrahim alayhissalam earned his living as a shepherd and became known for his hospitality. But there was sadness in his heart. He had grown old, and he had no child to carry this cause after him. The shared destiny of Hajar and Sareh would later open the path to the establishment of Mecca, a path that would change human history. Ibrahim alayhissalam had left, but Nimrod remained. The miracle of the fire had silenced Babylon, but not Nimrod's heart. He did not step back. On the contrary, he covered his fear with pride. This is how oppressors are. When they see a miracle, they do not bow. They build a bigger lie. Nimrod could not burn Ibrahim, but he did not tell the people this way. He sat in his palace, he stood firm on his throne, and he said, "I wanted to burn him, but his Rab saved him. So I offered sacrifices to his Rab." These words were not faith, they were fear dressed up. Nimrod did not accept Allah, he only feared Allah's power. This is the difference between faith and fear. Faith submits, fear only hides. After the fire, Nimrod's nights changed. His sleep was broken, his dreams grew dark. He strengthened the palace gates, he increased the guards. He watched everyone with suspicion. Because an oppressor fears the most when he is alone. And Nimrod was alone. Ibrahim was gone, there was no one left to silence, but the voice was inside Nimrod. "Bring the sun from the west." This sentence never left him, not on his throne, not in his bed. The Quran does not tell Nimrod's end by name, but the law of Allah does not change. Oppression continues, but destruction comes suddenly. Allah did not come to Nimrod with lightning, not with an earthquake, not with fire, because fire had already taught him his lesson. Allah struck Nimrod with the smallest thing, a fly. The Quran explains this measure like this: "Indeed, Allah is not shy to give an example even of a mosquito or something smaller." Bukhari 26. This verse is the key to Nimrod's end. One day it began, the air changed, the sky darkened, not with clouds, with flies. It is reported that Allah sent swarms of flies over Babylon and its surroundings, like dust, like fog. People ran, but there was nowhere to run. The flies stuck to the skin, they sucked blood, they ate flesh. People dried up, as if their insides were emptied. This was not a sudden death, it was a slow collapse, because oppression is destroyed slowly. Nimrod was afraid. He left his palace, he locked himself in his fortress. The walls were thick, the doors were iron. "No fly can enter here," he said. Oppressors always say this, "Nothing can happen to me." But Allah does not enter through the door, he enters through the keyhole. The most terrifying part of the reports begins here. It is said, one of the flies was crippled. It could not fly. It is narrated that it said, "O my Rab, I could not reach this destruction." Allah opened a way for it. That fly entered the room where Nimrod was through the keyhole. No army, no sword, no fire. A fly. The fly first landed on Nimrod's knee. Nimrod noticed and chased it away. Then it landed on his face. He chased it again. Then it landed on his nose and stayed there. The fly entered through his nose. Slowly, silently, it moved toward the brain and stayed there. Nimrod's head began to ache, but this was not an ordinary pain. It was destruction from within. He screamed. He called out, "Help me!" The servants looked and whispered, "Is this the God? He cannot even defeat a fly." Nimrod could not bear it. He said, "Hit my head with a hammer." They struck him. The pain decreased. They struck again. It decreased again. For 2 months, a god lived by having his head beaten. This is the fall of power. This is the funeral of pride. One day a servant struck harder and Nimrod fell, silently, without honor, forgotten. No army remained, no palace remained. A fly defeated a king. This is not a tale, this is a warning. In the words of the Quran, Allah does not guide the wrongdoing people. Bukhari 258. Nimrod was told to bring the sun from the west. He could not. In the end, he could not even remove a fly. Ibrahim alayhissalam did not see this destruction, but he heard of it. And he knew this. Allah gives victory to his cause not with fire, but with time. The oppressor rushes. The truth is patient, and the one who is patient always wins. Nimrod had been buried in the ground, but the tests of Ibrahim alayhissalam were not over. Oppressors go, tests remain, because Allah tests his close servants not only with fire, but also with separation. Years passed. Ibrahim alayhissalam grew old. Our mother Sarah grew old. There was a lack in their home, silent but deep. A child. Prayers were made, nights passed. Patience grew. The Quran describes this state briefly but powerfully. My Rabb, grant me a child from among the righteous. Safat 100. This prayer was more than a wish, it was a request for a trust. Our mother Sarah had a servant, Hajar. She had been given as a gift by a king. She was quiet. She was humble, but her destiny was great. After long reflection, our mother Sarah freed Hajar, and she asked Ibrahim alayhissalam to marry her. This was not an easy decision, but great tests require great hearts. Ibrahim alayhissalam married her, and Allah opened the door. A child was born, Ismail, a voice after many long years, a breath, a hope. The house was filled, but hearts became mixed. It is reported that when Ismail was born, the Nur passed. The heavy trust of the line of prophets was placed into one body. This was not an ordinary child. This child was the beginning of an ummah. Our mother Sarah was human. She had a heart. She had pain. She loved Ismail, but there was a pain inside her, because the child she had waited for did not come from her own body. This was not a sin. This was a human state. But the test deepened here. Our mother Sarah asked that Hajar and Ismail be taken to another place. This was not expelling. This was setting a boundary, and this boundary was opening to a divine plan. Ibrahim alayhissalam hesitated, but the command came. This time there was no fire. This time there was no miracle. There was only the command. The Quran records this scene with a prayer. Our Rabb, I have settled some of my children in a valley with no crops near your sacred house. Ibrahim 37. This verse is the verse of a journey. Ibrahim alayhissalam took Hajar and the small Ismail. Jibreel guided them, mountains were crossed, valleys were passed, and they stopped. Around them stone, the land dry, the horizon silent, no crops, no water. Ibrahim alayhissalam asked, Here? Jibreel pointed, Yes, here. This place was today's Makkah. But on that day there was nothing, only destiny. Ibrahim alayhissalam placed Hajar and Ismail there. He left with them a little water and some dates. Then he turned his back. He took steps forward, and Hajar spoke. O Ibrahim, she said, did Allah command you to leave us here? This question was not rebellion. It was the key to submission. Ibrahim alayhissalam stopped. Without turning his head, he answered, Yes. Hajar fell silent. Then she said, Then Allah will not abandon us. This sentence is the foundation of Makkah. Ibrahim alayhissalam walked away. He did not look back, but his heart stayed behind. A father was leaving his child in the desert. A husband was leaving his wife alone with thirst. This was not something reason could carry, but faith goes beyond reason. Ibrahim alayhissalam moved away. He climbed a hill. He raised his hands. The Quran conveys this prayer exactly. Our Rabb, turn the hearts of people toward them and provide for them. Ibrahim 37. This prayer would be accepted thousands of years later. Our mother Hajar was left alone. Ismail was crying, the sun was burning, the water was decreasing, but her heart was calm because the question had been asked and the answer had been received. Makkah was founded like this, not with stone, not with walls, with the submission of a mother, with the tears of a father, with the destiny of a child. This valley was not an ordinary place. It would become the heart of the earth. But first, there was thirst. First, there was loneliness. Because Allah begins even the greatest cities from nothing. The desert was silent. The sun hung in the sky like a heavy stone. Our mother Hajar was alone. Beside her was a baby. Around her was nothing. Ismail alayhissalam began to cry. This was not an ordinary cry. It was the sound of thirst. Our mother Hajar looked. Her baby's lips were dry. His breathing was becoming weak. For a mother, there is no heavier sight than this. Our mother Hajar left her baby for a moment and moved toward a nearby hill. Safa. She climbed up. She looked around. Nothing. She went back down, this time to the other hill, Marwa. She looked again, nothing, but she did not stop. Because submission does not mean sitting still. Submission means doing everything you can. This running did not happen once, not twice, not 3 times, 7 times, each time more tired, each time more helpless, but each time with hope. During every run, our mother Hajar did one thing. Even while running, she kept looking back at Ismail, because a mother does not forget the trust, even while searching for hope. At one point she stopped. She turned back, and she heard a sound. Our mother Hajar turned. She looked at Ismail, and she saw it. Water was coming out from under the feet of Ismail alayhissalam. At first it was small. Then it increased. The ground split. Water burst out. This was not rain. It did not come from the sky. It came from the earth. Because sometimes mercy comes not from above, but from below. Zamzam. Our mother Hajar became worried. The water was flowing. It was spreading. She used her hands. She gathered the soil. And she called out, "Zam, Zam, stop, stop." These words entered history. They gave this water its name, Zamzam. This water is still flowing. Centuries passed. Empires collapsed. Cities were destroyed. But Zamzam continued to flow. Our Prophet ﷺ said, "May Allah have mercy on the mother of Ismail. If she had left Zamzam as it was, it would have become a river." Bukhari, Anbiya. Birds came. They flew. They landed near the water. This was a sign. Travelers saw the birds. They said, "There is water here." They came closer. They saw our mother Hajar, a woman, a child, a spring. They asked for permission to stay. Our mother Hajar accepted. The first tents were set up. The first fires were lit. But this fire was not the fire of Nimrod. This fire was for life. Makkah was born like this, with the footsteps of a mother, with the thirst of a baby, with the patience of a spring. Zamzam still speaks, not to the ear, but to the heart. With every sip it says this, Allah never abandons the one who submits. This water does not only remove thirst, it also removes fear, because this water is the memory of one word, yes. The 3 tests of Shaitan Zamzam had burst forth, but the test was not over, because Allah does not remove tests after giving blessings. On the contrary, He deepens them. A new period was beginning for Ibrahim alayhissalam. One night, Ibrahim alayhissalam saw a dream. In his dream, he was sacrificing his son. He woke up, his heart tightened. This was not an ordinary dream. Still, he paused. He waited. The second night, the same dream. The third night, the same scene. Now Ibrahim alayhissalam knew. This was not a whisper from Shaitan. This was a command from Allah. The Quran makes this clear. We gave him good news of a gentle son. Safat 101. And right after that, the test comes. Ibrahim alayhissalam decided, but this decision was not taken alone. His son was also part of this cause. Ismail alayhissalam had grown up. He was old enough to walk with his father. They set out. With them were a knife, a rope, and a heavy silence. Shaitan always attacks where he thinks people are weakest. This time, he went to the mother. He came to our mother Hajar in human form. "Do you know," he said, "where Ibrahim is taking your son?" Our mother Hajar answered calmly, "To a friend." Shaitan smiled. "No," he said. "He is taking him to sacrifice him. He thinks his Rabb commanded it." These words were poison, but Hajar did not panic. She asked, "Did Allah command it?" "Yes." Our mother Hajar paused. Then she said, "If Allah commanded it, then it is good." Shaitan fell silent, because submission is the only door Shaitan cannot enter. This time, Shaitan turned to Ismail. "Do you know where your father is taking you?" "To a friend." "No," said Shaitan, "he is taking you to kill you." Ismail alayhissalam stopped. He was not surprised. "Did Allah command it?" he asked. "Yes." Ismail alayhissalam picked up a stone and threw it at Shaitan. "If Allah commanded it," he said, "there is nothing to fear." Shaitan was driven away again. Then Shaitan made his final move, from the hardest place. He stood before Ibrahim alayhissalam. "O old man," he said, "are you trusting a dream? What if this is deception?" Ibrahim alayhissalam stopped. His eyes became firm. "You are Shaitan," he said. "Stay away from me." He picked up stones and threw them at 3 different places. These 3 stonings are the origin of the Jamarat performed during Hajj today. This is not a tradition. This is resistance. The mother submitted. The son submitted. The father submitted. That is why this test is great. The Quran seals this scene with these words. When they both submitted, and he laid him down on his forehead. Safat 103. There is no shouting in this sentence, no struggle, only submission. It is reported that the angels witnessed this scene. The heavens trembled. Ibrahim alayhissalam stopped and spoke to his son. "O my son," he said, "I see in a dream that I am sacrificing you. What do you think?" This was not an order. It was a testimony. Ismail alayhissalam replied, "My father, do what you are commanded. You will find me among the patient." Safat 102. This is a word with no equal in history. A child walks toward death like this. Ismail alayhissalam made his final requests. "Tie me tightly. Sharpen the knife. Do not look at my face." These words are not dramatic. They are real. Because faith is not decorated. It stands as it is. Ibrahim alayhissalam cried. But he did not stop. Tears do not prevent submission. The knife was drawn. It did not cut. It was drawn again. Still it did not cut. Then the command came. "O Ibrahim, you have fulfilled the dream." Safat 104. The test was over. The divine substitute Jibril came. He brought down a ram from paradise. Takbir rose. These takbirs still echo today. The Tashriq takbirs began like this. The father and son returned. They reunited with Hajar. A family had passed the heaviest test, and Allah remembered them with these words. "Indeed, this is how we reward those who do good." Safat 110. This is not a story. This is a measure.